Welcome. My name is Hannah Evans. I am a research associate with Springtide Research Institute. And with me are Ron and Ruth from Generation Spark. And today we're going to be having a conversation about intergenerational relationships as a part of a project we are currently working on with the Lilly Endowment about what is working to engage young people. Welcome, Ron and Ruth. Thank you so much for being here.
It's our
Thanks,
pleasure.
Anna. It's great to be with you.
I'm very excited for our conversation.
So,
So just to start, can you tell me a little bit just about Generation Spark, what it is you guys do, and kind of just the whole scope of your work?
Hannah, that's a big question, but we will go for it. Just a little bit of history. Generation Spark started under Virgil Gawker at Hope College. He just saw a need for young people to be connected with the older generation. And so through that, Generation Spark started. The fascinating thing about Generation Spark is that it was very much student-led at Hope College. This was students recognizing that they wanted to be connected and to have somebody walk alongside them. So for a while, Generation Spark was under Hope College. And as the work continued to expand, the vision for what Generation Spark could be and do also expanded. So they connected with RCA and CRC and said, what would it look like for us to have this work be hosted under denomination, which will then be able to reach a wider audience, congregation specifically, to do this work. And that's really how we started the partnership between RCA and CRC to hold this grant, to apply for another grant with the Lilly Endowment, and to expand our imagination for intergenerational ministry.
the work that we do is primarily focused on training congregations, leaders, to think critically and experiment with intergenerational mentoring relationships.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that Virgil found in his research and with the young people that were leading this is that a good number of our young people felt like they were being graduated out of church once they left high school. And would that have changed had they had a relational connection to somebody older in their congregations that would give them a wider sense of belonging to the community? Research has told us, and experiential learning has taught us, that that's in fact the case. And so our work is about training churches up using the Generation Spark model to incorporate this learning within their congregational settings based on their context. It's not a one size fits all. Every context is different, and so we recognize that, and we actually think that's important to be recognized as we roll out this training for the churches.
Yeah, I would say, at the heart of Generation Spark is we're recognizing transitions. We're asking ourselves, where are young people stepping away? And where do they need support, whether that's in relationships, in their identity, in their vocation or wellness or spiritual religion, whatever that may look like. And we're recognizing that that's not the case just for young people. Transitions happens within our older generations too. And so what would it look like to create a space where both those communities can come together and see the need and desire to belong and to flourish together?
I love that. Ron, you mentioned this Gen Spark model. Can you talk a little bit about what that model is and how you came into it?
Yeah, so the Generation Spark model really looks at its heart, taking a couple people, an older person and a younger person, matching them up and encouraging them to work on a problem together. And so what we've found that's beautiful about that is sometimes relationships or those kind of connections can feel awkward. And so if we give them something that they feel passionate about to work on together, usually you can see some real fruit come from that. And so with that Generation Spark model, we encourage the churches as they start pairing up the younger and older person to listen to the younger person to say, what is on your heart? What would you like to work on together? Instead of the older person coming in and saying, this is what we're going to work on, actually encouraging the young person to say, hey, I'm wrestling with this, or I'm wondering about this. And that the two of them come together for a period of time to explore what does Scripture teach us about this? What could be something that the world is helping us try to understand around this? And what would it look like for actually us to tell this story of what we've learned to the broader audience, the congregation, or the body that we're kind of connected to share those insights? And so it gives them a voice, gives them an opportunity to be seen as an individual that is important within the community, that their voice is valued and heard. And that's such a big deal for our young people, right? As they explore what it means to just, and if we want to use fuller language to figure out who I am, where do I fit and what's my purpose? These are great avenues to help them explore that. And then to share with the rest of the congregation to say, yeah, this is who I am. This is what I'm wrestling with. And this is kind of where we're seeing God show up in the midst of these conversations together. It's a beautiful, beautiful model, and so that's what we encourage churches to learn about and to implement within their congregations.
One of the reasons we are talking with you guys and so excited about the work that you're doing is because part of our Lily project is this what's working concept, and one of our themes is intergenerational relationships, which you guys have spent so much time and thought doing such great work with. And I loved your description of putting an older person and a younger person together to, wrestle with a problem or take something on together, because Ruth, you are a younger person, and Ron, you are an older person working together on a problem. And I'm curious, could you say more about how your work has shaped your team and how you guys work together on your team?
Oh, such good things. When I honestly cannot remember a time I haven't been working with Ron. We started together in Generation Spark, and as our team continues to figure out our own giftings and the ways in which we lead, our work has become a little bit more distinct from each other. But Ron and I began as coaches together. We said, what would it look like to walk alongside congregations as they do this work? And so that is part of our model already built in Generation Spark, is as we're modeling for our churches what it looks like to do intergenerational ministry, we're also doing it. So a lot of the ways in which I ask questions, I think about mentoring, and as I walk alongside coaches, comes from Ron. Ron has been a youth leader, a coach, an empathetic listener to a way in which I'm still growing and learning. And so I can recall meetings from the beginning asking Ron, what kind of questions do you ask in your coaching meetings? I'm a fixer. I see a problem and I want to fix it right away. And Ron being able to say, well, we ask more questions. We listen. We hear their stories before we jump into, here's how you can fix this. Here's how you can build this. Yes, we get to that, but the journey is that we're really walking alongside congregations. And in order to do that well, you have to actually situate yourself in a position of listening really, really well. And Ron does that for our team. He asks inquisitive questions. He is so curious, but also he really roots us in Scripture. I would say for the most part, a lot of our models of how we do our meetings and how we train and equip congregations comes from Ron centering us in Scripture.
Thank you for that, Ruth.
You're welcome.
But the reality is it goes the other way too. For Ruth and I working together as closely as we do, it's been a joy for me, because I realize that as I'm a little bit older than she is, I just value her just a little bit. I value her input so much. One of the things that I appreciate, and I think that's probably why I've been serving in a youth ministry capacity for decades, is I love our young people. And I desire for our churches to love them the same way I do, and to wonder with them, and to explore different things together. And so when we as a team come together, it is that in that space of a genuine curiosity and wondering and gracious compassion for each other that I think we try to model together as a team. Because let's face it, we're just not the only two. We've got a few
Mhm.
others that are on the team, and they are all a little younger than I am. So I am blessed to be surrounded by them and continually encouraged of, and I'm going to say it this way, the hopefulness for the Big C Church because of these young people that surround me. And to me, that's encouraging, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And so I'm blessed by it. And like I said, our modeling together, even to the churches as we coach them, as we spend time with them, our heart is to genuinely listen well, be lead with integrity, and uh, model a sense of intergenerational connectedness that I think at times can get lost on the hierarchy of some of our church settings.
Mm,
And so for us
yeah.
to pull away and model this in our own setting is really important, because then it then becomes an extension to the churches that we train, because that's been the heart for Ruth and I as we've been coaching churches. Let's model this. Let's have this be a pouring out of who we are so that they see it lived out, and that they can then by extension um, roll that out into their settings. And we've seen fruit from that. And I would say too that as Ruth highlighted, bathing it in scripture and prayer is just a vital piece of our work, because without Christ as the center of this doesn't work.
Yeah. Do you, I'm curious about what you've seen in the work that you do with the people in the churches that you've worked with. Do you have any stories that you especially love about seeing intergenerational connections be a space of learning and joy and support?
Mm.
Do you want me to start, Ruth?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a church that we have been working with for it's coming up on about 3 years. That's
Mm.
located in Canada. And this was a congregation that, coming out of COVID, was wondering, how do we do something connected to intergenerational relationships, specifically around mentoring. And this young lady who had been dealing with her own trauma in her own life reached out to us and said, I've been informed about this thing called Generation Spark. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? And so, as Ruth and I do, when we have that, we have a phone call or some sort of a connection with the person instead of an email, because we find that just so impersonal. We just think, let's have a conversation. And so we had a conversation with this young lady, and this young lady was a young adult who had been mentored in her own life, and said, I want to see if we can implement this into my own congregation, because it's been such an important piece of my life. I want our entire community to also live into this space. And so they began early on with trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean scripturally? What does this mean from a research perspective? And how might we experiment with this in our setting so that we might be ready for a full, robust rollout of Generation Spark? And so after a couple of years of just conversations and reaching out in those spaces of training, this young lady is now seen and heard as a valuable contributor to the church as a whole. That's one thing. So we've seen leadership development in this space. But one of the other things that's been fascinating about her story is that for them to learn this, to really dive deeply into this, they said, I think it's really important for us to do this first as leaders, to see what it means and see what it looks like, modeling like Ruth and I have talked about for ourselves,
Mm.
and so that the congregation can see it themselves. And so that's what they did. And they said through that learning experience, they realized, oh, this is why we do it this way. This is why we can talk about this with the young people and the older people. they are now beginning to take on a second rollout of Generation Spark within their congregation. And what's beautiful about this story, and I just had a call with this lady yesterday. This is a congregation that meets as Caucasian, but there's also a group that's Mandarin. And they're now saying,
Mm.
we want to implement this into the Mandarin community as well. And we're going to teach them what this means and looks like. And so now all of a sudden we're looking at this learning, which took some time, now being implemented into a different community that also worships in this church, but saying, oh, this is so valuable. And they're coming back, the students are coming back to say, we want this. We want this for ourselves. And so that's just a beautiful story of how this has worked, how they've seen fruit, but more importantly, that we've seen some leadership development in this space so that these young people say, this is my community. I belong here. And I want more connections with people who are older than I am. And because that's important to them.
I love that the story started with a young person saying, I want to see my congregation like grow and thrive in this way. I think a lot of times these things happen like top down, and it's really cool to see that start from a young person's desire for connection in their congregation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we are beginning to find out that the more young people are invested in this too, the more the congregation is able to see a new vision forward.
Yeah. How have you seen young people's relationships with adults help young people thrive?
You want to start, Ruth?
Yeah, I think I do have a story this time. We're just continuing to be amazed by the way in which a small connection sparks dialogue in creative ways. One of the things we do in Generation Spark is listening sessions. We invite congregations to listen to their congregation. And so we send out these surveys, and anybody in your congregation can fill it out. And then you do a roundtable listening based on the results you've received. And from that, we're often helping congregations debunk some of the myth that they have about each other, right? We often have young people saying, you don't need us, you don't want us, you don't care how we think or what we feel about this or that. And then we have older generations sometimes saying they're not invested, they just want to do this or that. But when they actually get to sit at a table and hear each other, the hearing, the feeling that comes up actually are really transformational. And so we've done a couple of these listening sessions across the region, and the things that come up are just incredible, because now we have young people saying, what do you mean when you say you want a legacy? Oh, your idea of legacy is about something sustainable that lives beyond yourself. Now you're not just saying you want to keep things the way they are, right? That's often what young people hear when they hear legacy. And so now in that space of dialogue, you're able to actually nuance the conversation and help congregational members understand, oh, legacy for you is an ongoing learning that you get to leave behind. And in a similar way, young people get to tell their older congregations, actually, we long to have somebody pour into us. We long to have somebody ask us, what do we need? What's going on in our lives? We're actually not that scary. You can approach us. And so through these conversations, we're able to really help lower the anxiety in the room about what one generation says to the other, and to actually really listen and be transformed by that experience.
And it's interesting, as we do these listening sessions, we're both collecting information about, how can we tweak or roll out Generation Spark better. That's one thing. But two, that we create an on-ramp for healthy, genuine conversations that allows them to have a safe place to share some of their concerns and those things about faith that perhaps they haven't been given an opportunity to share in the past. And so for us, that's a really, really important part of this. And both Ruth and I have been in these listening sessions and just inspired by these young people, really trying to see and hear just the heart, what's going on in their lives, and this I guess this desire to be part of a loving, faithful community that welcomes them as they are, because they're coming with a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world with our young people right now. And let's face it, some of us older people, and I'm going to clump myself in that space, sometimes do not understand it. And so they need to be heard. And so for us, this is a really, really important part of our work, to make sure that they are heard, they are valued, that they cared for and loved.
Yeah. How have you seen older adults' relationships with young people help adults to thrive?
Mm.
So recently I did a learning webinar with a congregation, and one of the things we did to help their congregations be more hospitable to one another was to help them reimagine how they do their confirmands, right? Oftentimes the confirmand is some random person gets to walk alongside a young person as they transition into profession of faith. But we said, what would it look like for you to spend this week with a young person? But you young person gets to choose who that person is that walks alongside you for the duration of your process. And so we had 8 young people during this time choose for themselves who they were going to walk alongside them. And after their profession of faith happened, we did a mini listening session, Anna and I, with this church, with the older generation that actually got to do this with their young people. And the things they were able to say were just beautiful. They were able to refreshingly say, my goodness, I have faith in the next generation, and my faith in God is renewed. Right? They now have hope and joy and peace, that they actually have something to contribute to the next generation, but that their faith grew during that time. They're saying we often take for granted the fact that we know all of our creeds and confessions. But when you have to walk alongside a young person and they're going to ask you, why the Lord's Supper? Why do we have these things in place? Now it's no longer just a habit that you do all the time, but when you have to explain the foundation of your faith to someone else, you recognize how much you don't know and how much of it really is faith. And the things you do know, that young person is helping you see in a new way. And so coming out of that experience with this church was really beautiful for me, to see the ways in which they were able to say, in my old age, I am growing. I am learning to rediscover my faith in a new way.
There's a story of a congregation that was wrestling with how do we continue to engage with the grade 5 and 6 students in the church, because that's a difficult Sunday school. Where does that fit? And so this one youth pastor, whom I know pretty well, had this idea. Said, what would it look like for us every Sunday that we do communion, that we take the grade 5 and 6 students and we have them with the elders and the deacons preparing the elements beforehand, to do it with the grade 5 and 6 students, explaining why we do what we do, pouring the juice in the cups and breaking the bread together. And then he said, oh, let's go a little bit further, that during the service, just before communion is presented, that they actually deliver the elements, up the center aisle and bring all the elements. So, and it was interesting. There was one of the leaders in the congregation, or in the board, said, yeah, this is a good idea, but I'm a little worried. What if they spill while they're walking it in? right? And so, of course, you can see the tension there, right? It's much deeper than just the learning. And the youth pastor wisely said, then we have a great opportunity to really share the broken body and the shed blood of Christ.
Mm.
And so it was really fascinating. And so this congregation did this for a number of years, and it was beautiful because I think there was this real sense of genuine learning together. It also meant the parents had to show up a little bit earlier before the Sunday service to bring them. So there was a mutual purpose of encouragement there. But when I heard that story, I thought, yeah, this is kind of cool. And what would that look like? For us to invite other congregations to find that thing to work on together between these older and younger generations, and experience this fuller expression of what it means to be the body of Christ in this way. So, again, where you see the learning together between the older people and really trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this and do this well? But also to make sure we create space for the learning with the younger generation together. And so that we come together in a place of mutual learning that doesn't feel like it's older versus young, but it's together. It's the sense of community together.
You kind of mentioned offhandedly parents having to be committed to it to bring their young people early for the service. And I'm curious, maybe more generally, just what do you see as the role of parents in the intergenerational work? Some young people still live at home with their parents. Some in their 20s or college students are more an adult. But how do parents fit into the conversations about intergenerational relationships?
So quite often, and Ruth can add to this if she likes, but there's two texts that we go to quite regularly when we talk about this. And so one text specifically in the New Testament is about the relationship between Timothy and Paul, who, when Paul writes the letter to Timothy talking about his relationship with Lois and Eunice, both grandmother and mother, and the relationship of Timothy and bringing him up in the faith, and Paul noticing the full expression of that faith and say, you know what you're doing, your calling is an expression of the faith formation that was long put into your life, both from your mother and your grandmother. And that's a beautiful thing. And so he highlights that as part of his journey, becoming a pastor, right? And walking with the church in Ephesus. But the other text that we regularly use as kind of a baseline or a benchmark for this is the Deuteronomy 6 text, which talks about, both the Shema, introducing, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commands that I give you today, which came in that early Old Testament script, it talks about this time of living it out, right? God has called us to worship the one God, the one true God, the one God who created this world, not the other gods of the world. Right? We're saying, no. There is the one true God. And our role is to remember that, to remember our lives in that, who we are in that, and then to impress them on our children. They actually use language like impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you get up and when you lay down. We use examples of when you go to soccer practice, when you go to baseball practice, when you drop them off at school, continue to live out that full expression of who we are as created image bearers of Christ. And write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. And so those two texts really indicate to us that it is, partly a parents, but then it's the broader community as well. It's not just the one, but it's us together, right? Recognizing that in that text, in that Deuteronomy text, it wasn't just talking to the parents. It wasn't just talking to the caregivers. It was talking to the congregation. It was talking to the entire body to say, this is our collective call. And so parents aren't supposed to be doing this in isolation. Part of their role is to do this, but we are together doing this. And so there's a huge responsibility for the parents And I think that's part of our challenge right now in youth ministry as a whole, not just in mentoring, but recognizing that some of the 5-to-1 things that Fuller talks about and sticky faith, reversing the trend of just one spiritually strong adult walking with 5 young people, but actually turning it around. We need 5 spiritually strong, mature people walking alongside this one young person. And that includes not just the moms and dads and grandparents, but the collective body, because this is how important this is. This is how important it is for our faith formation.
Yeah, I would say, alongside that faith foundation is also research, right? And Ron named some of the research in which we pulled from. We include Fuller, we include Barna, we include a lot of research, religious and non-religious organizations that help our congregations recognize the importance of doing life together, the importance of walking alongside families, right? Ron and I, our favorite things are baptism and the ways in which baptism invites us into life together. The congregation, alongside the parents, are saying, we commit to walking alongside parents, family for the spiritual development of this child that is now invited and included into the community of God. And so really oftentimes we're helping churches actually live into that covenant that they have committed to. And we do that through research, we do that through scripture, and we do that through relational connections. Because parents and guardians and congregations are to do that. For me, especially, my parents have been just an necessary part of my faith formation. And I wish that for every young person, because it doesn't just help with your faith, it actually helps with breaking down some of the generational gaps that are often there, right? And the trauma too. So many kids are disconnected from their families, which means that they're disconnected from their faith, which means that they're disconnected from the community of God. And so as we continue to close those gaps, we're actually offering intergenerational healing as an opportunity to grow with God and God's community. And so, yeah.
And I want to add to that. The realization, of course, is that not every family may be, a follower of Jesus Christ. And I've had many experiences where, we have young people who come to Christ through some event or some gathering or some transformative moment. And I just had a conversation with a young person last week about this, and recognizing that sometimes the dysfunctionality in the home is heartbreaking and traumatic. And so, but they still want to live into their faith. So they're saying, who can walk with me? Who can help me understand this a little bit more deeply? Because I'm not finding it in the home. So we realize those two things do occur, and there's still, and that's the power of the Holy Spirit. There's still these young people that are saying, I believe in Jesus Christ, and I want to learn more. I want to learn more. And so those are beautiful stories. And so we at Generation Spark recognize that's part of this story as well. And so how do then we develop these kind of thinking around how do we implement mentoring, intergenerational Christian mentoring within our communities, so that even though they may have had a faith formation in their home, but even if they haven't, we can still surround them with people that can walk with them in faith.
Yeah. Ron and I can go on forever on this topic. But
totally.
The last thing I will say is, at the heart of Generation Spark is adaptability.
Yes.
We listen to our congregations and our people so that we can adapt. And so every year, something new comes up for us. Last year was the importance of safe church policy. How do we actually train congregations for intergenerational ministry that is safe for all the people involved? And this year, we're wondering, how do we help mentor-mentee pairs as they walk together? And the other part of that is, how do we help parents and guardians to recognize the significance of this work? And so every year, Generation Spark continues to learn and adapt and equip congregations based on the feedback we receive. And a big part of that is, we are always going to miss something. right? Family structure is not the way, it's the world we live in which everything is touched by sin. But how is God's grace showing up in the lives of people? And how can we walk alongside them in developing communities that are robust enough to handle whatever it may be?
I love that you brought up adaptability, because adaptability is actually one of our main themes for this project, along with intergenerational relationships. See, really hitting all the big ones there. And one of the things, I just got off a call last week with a pastor at a church, and one of the things he was saying to me was like, well, we don't do anything like flashy, like we don't do any cool, like exciting stuff, but he's like, I just have this Bible study and they come, and he was like, we have kids who come who are like, I'm an atheist or I'm not religious, and he's like, great, like come anyway, like we can just like be together and talk, and you can like ask your questions, and he's modeling this like openness that you guys are talking about, and this willingness to meet young people where they're at, that we think is like so fundamental to what it means to meaningfully connect with young people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've got a story of a church that signed up for Generation Spark. And when Ruth and I did the interview, we were blown away by this little congregation that adapted, just as you described, to their what was happening in their context. And here's what they did, Hannah. They literally shut down all their programming and said, we are going to invest in intergenerational relationships because we believe that that's what we need to do, because the programming was actually causing us to be disconnected from the heart of that discipleship model. And so they took a risk in that, and they invested heavily in this space. But I'm telling you, that's exactly what you're talking about, is this recognizing the context, making those shifts, subtle or bold, and then living into that space. And it's not easy, because it takes a risk. But again, bathing it in prayer, bathing it in the gospel, and making sure that, okay, God, is this what you're really calling us to do? And if that's the case, then help us to find a way to do this and do this well. To me, you're again just highlighting this, what we call a ministry of presence, right? Showing up and then recognizing, okay, use us right now or whenever you want us to be ready for this, and just use us. And we're not going to come in with a preconceived solution to something. Let's actually dive into this together open-handedly and saying, okay, Holy Spirit, just kind of direct us in this space. That to us is a big part of what we're doing, and when we think about adaptability.
Yeah. That makes me think of, there's a Springtide term that we use that's called relational authority, which is like, it's in the name, but it's the components are like authenticity, transparency, honesty, integrity, like these different parts of really what it means to be a safe person for someone, especially for a young person. And this isn't particular to a religious tradition, but we have a lot of numbers around young people and loneliness, and about how like a third of young people only have like one trusted adult in their lives. And like hearing what you were saying about having five, like imagine having like five trusted adults like that you could go to talk about any number of different topics, like that, the impact that would have on young people. I like, faith formation is obviously such a big part of what you guys do, and that's very important, and young people want that. But I also think like even for a young person who grows up and like doesn't necessarily stay Christian, like the long-term meaning of like having had adults who like loved you, and to use the Fred Rogers term, like loved you into being, like like the long-term impact that would have on a young person's well-being is just like beyond my imagination almost at this point, because it's just so different from the way most young people live.
Yeah, I mean, the reality too is that main reason most young parents come back to the church is because they say, I want my child, my children to experience the community I experienced when I was younger. And my hope is like, how do we continue to expand that? Right? We want parents to come back, not just for their children, but for their own sake, right? To come back because they know there's community here. Not ever feel like they needed to leave. Grateful that they are coming back for their children. But how do we help parents and young adults stay throughout the process? Because this is a community of faith. But in order to do that, we need a community that is authentic and relational and pass on leadership in a healthy, robust way. Otherwise, it becomes a challenge to do that well.
Yeah. In your work with churches, what do you see churches doing in working with young people that you think is working?
So one area that I see that's really important, that is working, is when we take young people and give them the freedom to use the gifts that God has given them for in the body of the church.
Mm-hmm.
If we continue to program and minister to, that's not helpful. But when we minister with, that's when fruit starts showing up. And Fuller, in their work, talk about this growing with mindset. Steve Argue and Kara Powell have done some extensive work in this space. And so even changing our language about with changes the landscape. And so when churches have been incorporating that mindset into the ministry, then that works. But it also requires us then to make sure that it's going to cause us to think differently. It's not going to be the same wash, rinse, repeat, right? I mean, it doesn't work that way. And so we need to start thinking critically about some of the programming we have done, and maybe move away from assuming that because that was our experience 30 years ago, that it should apply today. The reality is it probably doesn't. And so let's think that through a little bit. So where I've seen it working well, just to summarize, is it's when we move our posture from minister to minister with our young people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know congregations that I've seen doing that well too are congregations that, for lack of a better term, are familiar. They just become friends with failure. Failure in the sense that they're willing to allow things to not be exactly as they planned, right? I think Ron was naming that too, but it means that when you do have young people walking alongside you and have leadership stake in the congregation, they are going to mess things up. Your leadership is going to be on the line. Your name is going to be on the line. So how do you become comfortable with being a leader who is comfortable with recognizing that there are risks to this way of doing life together, and that the beauty far outweighs that risk? What does it actually look like for you to fully do that? Because then it creates for your community a way of leadership and of transformation that it's not just about one person, right? I think in a world of charismatic leadership, what young people are drawn to is authentic leaders who are willing to be not the most well-known, most well-loved, but the most faithful to their calling, and are excited to bring young people along in the process. I think for me, that's what I find most appealing about the Christian faith, is leaders who say, I'm going to faithfully live out my calling, and I'm going to make sure I have others alongside me in the journey.
And a great example of that is when we're called to serve. And
Mm-hmm.
so oftentimes we let our hair down a little bit, or even remove some of those faces that we wear, right? When we show up in certain places. But when we are called to serve together, being our authentic self within the communities, that's amazing. That's transformation happening, and those are wonderful examples of where Christ shows up in the middle of what's happening, what's going on, and then there's we see commitment. We see, okay, this makes sense to me. This Christ thing starts to make sense to me.
Yeah, in our work, we talk to youth organizations on this What's Working project, youth organizations from all traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really strikes me is how important being able to thrive and knowing what's working requires being able to identify what's not working. Like to Ruth's, what you're describing, like I'm thinking of like being able to let something die or let something go requires so much courage and the willingness to build something new and to really like listen to the people in front of you. And when we talk to organizations that are like seem to be really thriving, the thing that almost all of them have said is that at some point they recognized something was no longer working, and that they were willing to let that go and do something new or change something in order to really be able to go forward.
Yeah.
Just to build on that, Ruth and I and our team, we've come to understand how this is hard work. Generation Spark, what we're encouraging the churches to be involved with and training them to do, it's hard work. And we name that right from the front end. We say, this isn't a box fix that comes off the shelf and you're going to, within 3 months, be right. This isn't the silver bullet. It's going to take time, and it's going to take investment in your time, but also the congregation's time. And it's hard work.
Yeah. In fact, our churches spend months with us learning about their context. We say before you can actually make a change, you have to actually learn about your culture and your community and how they understand what's happening, from being able to define for themselves what they think relational discipleship is to what it actually looks like in their community. So they spend a lot of time really evaluating their culture. And then we invite them to experiment based on what they've understood about who they are.
And just so you know, our work with them, and so Ruth and I have mentioned our coaching roles with them, and we've got a number of other coaches. That for us is a key part of this teaching and learning, is that we spend at least a year with them, just walking with them and coaching them, so that the congregations are not feeling in any way abandoned or left behind, that they're not learning something through a video screen, but they've actually got somebody that's got their back, that's in their corner, that they can go to and wonder about, learn about, celebrate with, as they go through this journey within their settings. And for us, that's a big important piece of the work that we do.
What draws you to the work that you do? What keeps you going? What keeps you passionate about the work that you're doing?
I'm going to just name this right from the top. My team and Ruth keeps me going, because their vitality and their passion for this is contagious. But also recognizing that this is gospel-centered, research-based, important work for the church, and at a time such as this, it's necessary within the church.
Yeah, I mean, what keeps me going is my friends and my community. Every time I'm currently the representative of faith in my friend group, right? And so when I hear their questions, when I see their longing for a community that values them and sees them and their gifts, and that is centered in helping make the world not just a better place, but a more faithful place, especially as it concerns the community of God. I'm passionate to helping seeing their vision be a reality and to be a part of that, because I think there's something profoundly beautiful when congregations become places where every member of our church feels valued and part of the community, right? Where their wisdom, their voices, and their enthusiasm is heard. And that happens across the generations. And that's what I want to see. And every time I get to be a part of stories that sparks that, it's just, yeah, it's at the heart of who I am and how I continue to discover my own calling.
Yeah. One of the things I'm going to be thinking about, leaving this conversation is how what's working or expecting, what it means to thrive and how to do that is really inner work just as much as it is communal work, structural work. There's this Parker Palmer quote from The Courage to Teach that says, we teach who we are in times of darkness as well as light. And I think that really goes for so many relationships. Like we pastor out of the overflow of who we are, and we structure ministry out of the overflow of who we are. And we're in relationship, like to be in relationship is to be at like caring for someone out of the overflow of who you are. And I think we wrestle with that a lot at Springtide because, people often want like answers, instructions for how to like do things better. And it's like, well, that requires so much like discernment and thought and context beyond like what we can just give you, like it's inner work, really. Like we can't, like we can give you the research, but you have to do that inner work of figuring out what's next for your organization. I know we're kind of wrapping up here. How can people learn more about Generation Spark?
Yeah, we have a site we're continuing to develop, but if you want to connect with us on Generation Spark, we have a Facebook page called Generation Spark. We have an Instagram also called Generation Spark. But we also have a podcast that we just launched, so you can find it anywhere you listen to audios, and it's called Generation Spark. We really like to keep it simple. But if you want articles and want to learn more about Generation Spark and the process, you can go to faithword.org/Generation Spark, and you can learn more about Generation Spark that way too.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for this conversation. It was so good. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah, for letting us be here with you.